Y'all want to watch Missouri with me? Oh, sorry. Misery, but what's the difference? Paul Sheldon, a very famous author, just finished his new book. As usual, he celebrates with a glass of Dom Perignon, thanks to Diddy's influence, and a cigarette before he heads out. He expects the ride back home to be smooth, but he unexpectedly gets caught in a snowstorm, and his vehicle veers off the road before rolling over. Just before that, Paul told his literary agent, Marcia Sindel, that he was done writing the Misery book series. It was what catapulted him into fame, but he doesn't want to write about it anymore. So now he has decided to kill the star of the story, Misery Chastain. He told Marcia he'd go to the Silver Lodge Creek in Colorado to write a new novel. Now stuck in a storm, he's lucky a stranger arrives and pulls him out. CPR is administered, and the stranger even grabs Paul's briefcase before carrying him to safety. When Paul finally wakes up, Annie Wilkes introduces herself as a nurse and Paul's #1 fan.
I'm your #1 fan.
They are in her farmhouse just outside Silver Creek. She keeps giving Paul Ozempic painkillers and promises to drive him to the hospital as soon as the roads are open. Paul has multiple broken bones, but Annie has managed to pop back his dislocated shoulder. I'm pretty sure that's not the only bone she finna pop. She also improvised to make sure his broken legs and thighs will start to heal. That leg looks worse than Caitlyn Jenner's glow down. Meanwhile, Marcia has been so worried she decides to call Sheriff Buster. Apparently, Paul has already checked out of the lodge, but she hasn't heard from him. They don't want to assume that Paul is missing, but Buster promises he'll look into it. Buster's wife, Virginia, who is also his deputy, says that there was a blizzard last Tuesday, the day when Paul checked out. Annie reveals that she was following Paul, and that is how she got to save him. So when she asks if she could read the new novel, Paul immediately agrees. The sheriff heads to the lodge and asks the owner, Libby, about Paul Sheldon. Libby notes that there was nothing unusual and that Paul left driving his '65 Mustang. Meanwhile, Annie expresses that she despises the new book. She hates the profanity in it, and the fact that it's not a misery novel just adds up to that. She gets so angry she accidentally spills some of the food on the bed. She sees how Paul looks at her, so she immediately apologizes. She even says, I love you, Paul. Boy, you better get your ass out of there yesterday. The sheriff heads out with his wife, Virginia, in search of any signs of Paul. Virginia starts feeling on his thighs, trying to get some of his shriveled up D. However, he says not right now, because it's too cold and extra shriveled up. The snow is so thick he fails to notice Paul's car just a few feet away from where a broken tree stands. Annie drives past the sheriff's car but doesn't say anything to him. She returns home with a copy of the latest misery novel. She tells Paul that she also called an orthopedic surgeon, and apparently the surgeon promised to send an ambulance for Paul as soon as the roads are open. Despite this, Annie says that the roads are still closed and that her phone line is still down. Worried about his daughter, Annie assures Paul that she already called Marcia Sindel and told her what happened. Annie is so happy with the new book that she even introduces her pet twin, Misery, to Paul. Paul is starting to get annoyed, but he always acts kindly towards Annie because he knows the bitch crazy AF, snorting like her twin. When Paul wakes up later that night, he finds Annie terribly angry after finishing the book. At the end, Misery dies after giving birth because Misery lived in Texas. Annie can't believe that the protagonist is dead. Feeling betrayed, Annie grabs a chair and slams it against the walls, terrifying Paul. Then she tells him that no one will ever come for him because she never called anyone. She stomps out of the house, leaving Paul alone. Realizing the situation he is in, Paul tries to get out of bed only to fall on the floor and hurt himself. When he wakes up, Annie is trying to help him up. She's much calmer now after breathing some fresh poppers. Paul, knowing how crazy she can be, pretends that he is not at all affected by her behavior. Annie admits that after praying, she realized that God sent her to Paul to help him realize something. She leaves the room and comes back with a grill, a matchbox, and some flammable liquid. He puts Paul's manuscript, the new one, on top of the grill and orders him to burn it. Paul casually says that he doesn't mind burning it because he already gave a copy to his agent. But Annie, being his #1 fan, knows that he only makes one copy, and he mentioned it in an old interview. She smiles and convinces Paul that burning it is for the best. When Annie starts to pour kerosene on the bed, Paul is forced to light the match and burn his new work to appease her. As she puts out the fire, they hear a helicopter coming close. Sheriff Buster is still looking for Paul, but because there is no '65 Mustang in sight, he decides to turn around. Paul looks defeated. Annie is so casual about the whole thing. She even hands Paul 2 more capsules of painkillers before leaving the room, but this time, Paul hides them under the mattress. He gets even more creative after that. He creates a hole in the mattress and hides the painkiller capsules inside. Meanwhile, Annie is bed-rotting in bed while eating chips. A few days after, Annie gets him a wheelchair. To his surprise, she also starts setting up a new studio for him. She brings in a new table and a typewriter. Annie wants Paul to write Misery's Return as a thank you to her for saving his life. He thinks it's stupid because Misery is already dead. Then Paul sees a bobby pin on the floor. He comes up with a reason to make Annie go back to town. He says that she brought the wrong kind of paper, but Annie gets angry because she already bought the most expensive one. Annie begins to crash out about how she did everything for Paul, only for him to never be satisfied. Before leaving, she throws a ream of paper on his thighs, making Paul twist in excruciating pain. When he sees her car leave, Paul uses the bobby pin he found to pick the lock. He finds out that the phone is literally empty. As he moves around, he almost breaks a ceramic penguin, but he manages to catch it and put it back. He then gets a pack of painkillers and hides it in his pants. Paul tries to escape through the kitchen door, but unfortunately, it's locked. He's about to grab the knife when he hears Annie's car. He hurries back to his room, pretending that nothing happened. When Annie asks why he's sweating, he says he's in so much pain and asks for more painkillers. This bitch so crazy even gives him a flying kiss to catch. Sheriff Buster finally finds Paul's car under the thick snow. The Colorado Police Chief, Sherman Douglas, announces that Paul Sheldon must be dead and that they expect to find his body after the first thaw, but Buster checks the car and is sure that someone forced the door open and pulled Paul out. Virginia over here wishing her husband didn't pull out last night. While Annie is distracted, Paul pours the contents of the painkiller capsules into a folded paper. Then he begins to write the new Misery story to please Annie. Annie becomes even more demanding, ordering Paul to make changes if she doesn't like it. She has another crash out, yelling at Paul. When she's finally pleased, Paul asks her to have dinner with him. He wants to celebrate Misery's return. She's smitten by the idea, and her pet kitty starts purring with anxiety. Meanwhile, Sheriff Buster buys Paul Sheldon's books to know more about him. He figures that it's going to help him find Paul. Or maybe you can interview the residents who live nearby. During dinner, Paul realizes he's eating the whitest type of food ever, meatloaf made with Spam. Paul proposes a toast. He tells Annie to get a candle to make it more ceremonial. Then he pours the painkillers he'd been collecting in her glass. Unfortunately, when Annie returns, she accidentally knocks the glass over. Even though he's disappointed, Paul can't do anything about it. She toasts to Misery, and Paul definitely looks miserable AF. Days pass, and he continues to write. He even lifts the typewriter to strengthen his healing arms. One rainy night, Annie walks in, looking sad. She's in love with Paul and doesn't want to lose him. She knows that now the book is almost done, and Paul's legs are almost healed. Paul would want to leave. He denies thinking this way, so Annie takes out a gun and reveals that she has thought about using it. Then she takes the car and leaves Paul alone in the house. What in the Republican NRA crash out was that? Meanwhile, a line from Paul's book grabs Sheriff Buster's attention. It says, "There is a justice higher than that of man. I will be judged by him." Paul is so scared he takes the kitchen knife. But before he returns to his room, he opens Annie's scrapbook, which contains all that is important to her. There are newspaper clippings about the death of Annie's father and of a top nursing student. There is also news about Annie being the head of the ICU and the maternity ward. Then everything else is about babies dying and Annie being arrested over their deaths. That night, Paul practices wielding his knife. "Yeah, kill the hoe!" But Annie doesn't enter his room, so he hides the knife under the mattress. Just after midnight, Annie injects him with a drug. He wakes up feeling weak. It turns out that Annie already knows he's been out of his room twice. She says her penguin is facing the wrong direction, and that is how she knows. She has also taken the knife and the bobby pin that Paul's been hiding. There is no way she will let Paul leave, so Annie takes out a sledgehammer and breaks both of Paul's feet, making Paul 2 feet shorter. One day, Buster sees Annie lashing out at other people. He heads to the local library and reads about her past. In one article, Annie is quoted saying, "There is a judge higher than that of man. I will be judged by him." It's the same as the one in Paul's book. So Buster asks around and learns that Annie bought some paper at a shop. It's enough reason for him to head to her house. Just before the sheriff arrives, Annie injects Paul with some sedative and hides him in the basement. Then she welcomes the sheriff to her home. She explains that she's such a big fan of Paul, and now that he's gone, she starts writing too so she can replace him. She even fixes him a spiked hot cocoa, but he ain't that dumb to drink it. Having found nothing, Sheriff Buster says goodbye. But Paul makes a sound, making the sheriff go back inside. He follows the sound and finds Paul begging for help, but Annie catches him and shoots him dead. Who finna touch Virginia's Virginia now? Annie is about to kill Paul too, but Paul begs her to let him finish the story until dawn. Then they can unalive each other after that. When she turns back, Paul quickly grabs a can of flammable liquid and hides it in his pants. As promised, Paul finishes the story. Then he asks Annie to get him a glass of champagne, a cigarette, and a match. Annie obliges, knowing that Paul has a little ceremony after finishing a book. While Annie is getting a second glass, Paul pours the flammable liquid over the manuscript. When Annie returns, he reveals that all of Misery's secrets, her real father, and who she ends up with are all in the draft. Then he lights the match and burns it all. Annie rushes to save it, and that's when Paul hits her head with the typewriter. But Annie gets back up, and they continue to beat up each other. She shoots him in the shoulder, and he tackles her big back. They wrestle each other, and he shoves the manuscript in her mouth. But this isn't exactly what she was hoping to get shoved in her mouth. He trips her, causing her to hit her head on the typewriter again. But she's still alive, and she only dies after Paul hits her hard with Annie's doppelganger. 18 months later, Paul's new book has been published. It's not a Misery novel, but he and Marcia are both happy with it. Marcia then suggests he write about what happened. However, Paul admits that sometimes he still sees Annie as if she's still alive. What happened during that time with her is forever etched in his memory. The waitress then admits she's his #1 fan. What did you guys think of this one? A subscriber really wanted me to recap this, and I've seen this hundreds of times growing up, so I enjoyed it once more.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe now and turn on the notification because YouTube isn't recommending my videos. And if you like to watch more foolishness, click here or here.